We are happy to welcome all of you on our channel at the Portugal Foundation. As you know, we have regular events on various current affairs. We discuss a broad range of international issues, scientific, economic, etc., all sorts of issues. And today, of course, we want to discuss modern technology, because technology affects the lives of all of us. And we are very happy that today we have a joint discussion with the AI Center and its effects on international affairs. We understand, of course, that technology progress has a profound effect on our lives. We encounter AI in our lives almost every day, and AI affects the area of international affairs as well. Today we have some wonderful experts with us, so we want to discuss this issue. We listed some of the things we want to discuss on our agenda. Our moderator will talk about this a little later. So I'll give the floor now to Anna Abramova, representing ADV Unesco MGIMO. Please, Anna.
Добрый день, коллеги. Дарья, спасибо.
Hello, colleagues. Thank you, Daria. Of course, AI attracts a lot of attention today from business, from regulators, from consumers. And at this point, we have more issues than solutions. So hopefully we can have an interesting discussion today, and maybe we can come up with answers to some of the questions. So today, we want to discuss the following questions. Should we expect a new dimension related to AI and new AI allowances? Are there any barriers to technological development related to AI? Is it possible to find some kind of compromise for international development with AI that would take into account the interests of all the key parties, the United States, the European Union, China, Russia, etc.? So today we have Sergey Nakvasin, and we also have Gaurav Sharma. We have Yuri Tsvetkov from Skoltech. And we have Dr. Benjamin Ang of Singapore. He is the coordinator of cybersecurity program at the International Research School of Rajaratnama, Singapore. First, I would like to give the floor to Sergey Nakvasin. Hopefully, Sergey will tell us about some Russian initiatives in this area of AI regulation. Sergey. Hello, colleagues, friends. Thank you very much for the introduction. The subject we have in front of us today seems very interesting to me. The role of AI in international affairs, in international collaborations, and using AI to resolve various issues that exist between countries. This is a very unorthodox subject. I don't think I have ever seen or heard a discussion on this subject, so I really look forward to the conversation we are about to have. Let me present the ideas that I have on this matter. Obviously, AI technology has been developing along digital platforms, and major digital platforms that we have in the world today, they are supranational or multinational. They're not limited to one state, one country only. And these major digital platforms, they are actually key players in international affairs today. So in addition to state actors, we have these digital platforms playing a major role. And we see many examples of digital platforms, as long as they have some breakthrough technology, disruptive technology, let alone AI. These digital platforms actually can influence people. They can sway the population one way or another. And since they can influence the population, this affects the policies of the country where these people live. And eventually, this affects the country's foreign policy. At the same time, we see some new regulation appearing in this area. This technology can be used to provide some recommendations for foreign policy leaders. So it is really interesting to discuss how AI can do this. I would like to share some slides with you. Just a second. I would like to emphasize the issue of ethics, soft regulation of AI. Okay, let me see if I can switch my slides. This question did not come up today or yesterday. The international community has been discussing for a number of years. Last year, UNESCO gave its recommendation on the ethics of AI. But even before UNESCO, there was a lot of work done by the OECD, as well as the Council of Europe and G20. They also did a lot of work on this matter. They also discussed these issues, and they also talked about the need to have some ethical principles in place as we develop new technology. Why is it so important? We have dozens of cases today where AI technology, while it is certainly beneficial, also created new risks, and we need to do something about that. Number one, very often we hear about unintended discrimination. I think this is extremely important for international affairs and for geopolitics, because if AI algorithms are discriminative, if they discriminate against certain nations, this can cause major problems around the world. Then there are certain risks related to protection of private data. And if this happens, this data can be used to manipulate certain people, including policymakers. And then there is direct damage. AI may be used to inflict direct damage. For example, if it is misused in medicine, in healthcare, right? Even though right now we are only talking about international affairs. but still. Also, I would like to mention the risk of the risks related to the fact that AI technology has not often been tested enough. It's not entirely safe in some cases. So this entails certain risks. And this may sound like sci-fi to you today, but in the long term, we may even lose control. AI may take over if we don't understand how AI works. If we only treat it as a black box, offering some recommendations, in the distant future, there's a risk of AI taking over, assuming control, and this can have disastrous consequences for the whole world. Last year, Russia adopted the Code of Ethics in the field of AI. This document attracted a lot of interest from the entire community, including developers, scientists, policymakers. And you can see on this slide that we have 65 companies that have joined this code, but actually the number is even greater today. Actually, it's over 70 today. We have a few more companies who have subscribed to this code of ethics in the field of AI. So this is one of the largest networks. And we are very happy that we have this kind of network here in Russia, developing, gaining new members. And we would love to see other countries to do something similar as well, especially the leading countries in the sphere of AI. We think they all should have this kind of ethical code. We really believe it's important. This is our national portal for AI in Russia. And we have two versions, Russian and English, available online. So you can learn more about AI in Russia. Every year we progress in the world rankings of AI. We move up 1 or 2 or 3 spots every year. We have a lot of developers, experts in AI who are pretty influential worldwide as well. But like I said, we believe the entire work on AI should be based on solid ethical principles. This is really important to us. As long as we have solid ethical principles in our foundation, we should be able to use AI safely around the world. And it will only serve good purposes. Well, basically, that's all I have for right now, just to get our discussion started. And I look forward to comments from my colleagues, because I think this is a really interesting subject. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Sergey. I have a brief question for you. Have you considered any sectoral opportunities? Yes, actually. Thank you for the question. Healthcare, the healthcare sector takes the lead in this matter. Second, I would mention transport, the transport industry, because healthcare and transport are really important. Safety in these matters is really important for the people. So that's why these two sectors, they take the lead in promoting ethical principles. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions for Sergey right now, or shall we continue? Well, okay.
доктору Гаураву Шарме.
I would like to ask Gaurav Sharma now to take the floor and maybe Gaurav could share us the perspective from India, what Indian colleagues think about AI and possible regulation trends. Gaurav, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think there is, thank you for inviting me. I do work in the sector of AI with the German Development Corporation, but the views are my own. But what I would like to say is that I work in an area where AI is for social impact. So, coming to the three questions that you had posted, do we expect an emergence of new dimension of technology race? I think it's not a technology race, it is the use of technology race. And AI provides substantial good answers when it comes to, okay, you want to do crop mapping, or do you want to save the low resource languages globally? So I think the whole impact of AI is in its usability. It is being used in a lot of, good way to do, I would say, predictive analysis, or you say planning properly, specifically, with regards to climate change, mitigation and adaptation strategies. So it's the use of AI technology. Again, AI is very data intense as of now. If you understand the brass tacks of
Dr. Sharma, sorry for interrupting. Could I interrupt you for 1 minute?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Please, could you choose the track for language?
The language is English.
Yes, English. Could you please choose it?
I have chosen English.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, I hope, because I was listening to the interpretation also in English. So it should be English. You can confirm
yes, thank you.
If not interpreted rightly. It's okay?
Yes, it's
okay.
Yes, it's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting.
So no worries. So I think the Indian mindset is very simple. Indian mindset is on AI for all as a social impact. And also when it comes to ethics and AI, I think there is a regulation in terms of who commands the data. There is a push and pull regarding sovereignty of data, storage of data on the cloud, processing of data, because data still is the king when it leads to AI applications and use of AI applications. So it's also in a technological development race, we are trying to solve complex problems, but again, AI still is very nascent in terms of its learning. It is still in a supervised learning mode. So we still need an input, large amount of data input, and we also need the output as B, and we are trying to correlate A and B. So sometimes what happens is the role of development of AI in terms of how far-fetched is it in terms of artificial intelligence of sort of making decisions. It is still very, very, very low. But yes, there is a requirement for ethics in and around transparency and bias and a lot of issues, even security. What has really happened is that the functionality is still with the developers who are designing AI algorithms. So if it is designed for facial recognition in terms of law enforcement and surveillance, there is a certain requirement and certain need that you will start mapping faces, right? You will start mapping databases with criminals and everything else. But if you're trying to do the similar functionality of same algorithms, which is only for mapping crops like cotton or wheat or paddy, you will start doing that for that particular algorithm. So it is basically the functionality, which is also at a root of how AI development and AI ethics, role of ethics can actually take shape. Also, it is very sector specific. So if we look at even again the example of satellite imagery and you are mapping crops, you will do it very nicely. But if you are mapping border areas, and conflict zones, then you will map it very differently, right? So I think there is the same algorithmic intelligence can actually be used in security sector very differently and in social impact sector very differently. And that's where I think the conflict still stands, as and some of these sectors are out of the purview of being managed, right? So even if you take the EU AI Act, they have kept the security and defense sector as out of it. So even if they are taking AI Act regulations in a very deep way, in terms of understanding of security risks and risk hierarchy, they are still keeping some sectors out of it. So it's the same, I think, with a lot of countries who want to hold on to how AI is being utilized and more or less who is actually in control when it is. And big techs, I would come to the third topic of big tech. Still, the big tech companies are the ones which do command a lot of processing power. It also depends if China has 200 plus supercomputers, US has 150 plus, India has only 10, right? So it actually boils down to still the processing powers of one type of problem that you want to solve, but are your country capable enough of doing it? So if you take the international affairs, a lot of low and middle income countries might be very excited about the idea of artificial intelligence, but they would not be able to do much until of course there's an AI infrastructure, whether it is processing power or units or computing or expertise in terms of people, resources who are sort of very much in that they can drive this change. So still the whole development within AI still holds with the countries which are either rich in terms of putting in materialistic resources, infrastructure resources, or people resources in terms of competencies. So I would hold that thought in the sense that international affairs might get some sort of influenced with artificial intelligence, and there have been cases of fake identities and sort of but still it is still in a very stage where it can be arrested, it can be checked, and some measures are taken in. So lastly, I would just quote, like, Microsoft stopped any production of facial recognition product development as a mandate. So Microsoft, as a big company, took an ethical ground and said, we will not produce any products, at least which actually utilize the power of facial recognition in recognizing people. Yeah. So thank you, Anna, and thank you for inviting me.
Спасибо большое, доктор Шарма. У нас
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma. We have two questions in parallel. First of all, I would like to clarify. You talked about two types of countries, those who have certain resources in the AI field and those who have potential for the development of artificial intelligence. In this area, I'm interested to know how India solves this issue of the development and also the issue of managing data in order to use artificial intelligence to the best of the society. Thank you for your answer.
Yes, I think the data is still a complex issue. So we recently came out, actually, this national data governance framework is still under draft. This is a new framework which had come out and it is still under discussions. So government has said that we would give a preamble and suggest what are the top 10 commandments that you should have upon data, but we will not try to completely control it. I mean, we had a data protection bill for personal data and non-personal data, which was there for 5 years, but it did not become a law. But now this national data governance framework might give us substantially something less, I would say, not so detailed in terms of legislature, but it gives a sort of a skeleton structure to how data should be in India. It is a complex problem, and I think India deals with a lot of diversity of data of the same type. So even if you take one type of personal data in terms of nomenclature, a name of people, there might be very many different complexities in terms of the language itself and how those names are written and pronounced, right? And then there is a conditionality on health data, right? So health is a big topic, but then health is also a very personal data, too personal. So how do you differentiate? So I think the framework might give us ideas about India is very much looking at the sovereignty of keeping the data inside India. Even the cloud structures should be formulated within India. The data fiduciaries who control in and out how the data is looked at, processed, and should be anonymized or to some extent looked at. But I think India has a bigger advantage because we have, as Sergey was talking, digital platforms, at least on the national identity level, which have been tested and improved upon. So if we take a new approach with data on AI, maybe there are sort of what you call inspirations from internet governance, from digital platform governance, from pharmaceutical regulations and governance, which might come into shape in designing the AI governance framework, right? But it's a long story. It's a not short answer. Yeah. And to your second question, I think a lot of low and middle income countries where we work in, at least Kenya and Ghana, which are developing their AI strategies as of now, they do take inspiration from India of how we did our strategic footprint on AI, but then strategic level AI definitions are also require institutional capacities. So if you need to have institutions which can do regulation, which can also take governance, which can also take capacity building, and it's a wholehearted effort. So if you are inspired by only strategic footprint, you can combine 2 or 3 good consultancies globally and get a strategic agenda or document. But to drive it down, it still requires a lot of institutional, hand-holding. And that's where I think India is also investing. We are getting new programs for our students to acquire data science, artificial intelligence. I mean, Dr. Angul actually substantiated, so you need to have a good workforce to really, go a long way in creating a credible sort of working, manpower on AI. But yes, there is a lot of inspiration because India is looked at as a country which is, still developing, not so developed, and we still don't have so many resources as, say, United States or China. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also, in the development of what was discussed, is it possible to develop artificial intelligence not in the international policy? Can countries develop this technology in the isolated way, or do we need this cooperation, international cooperation, to make the development more optimal and more stable?
Absolutely. International cooperation is required. I think India has signed a lot of strategic, technological bilateral and multilateral agreements where it wants to be a party to cross-learn, cross-fertilize, and understand what is happening. So at least in Germany, we do have a mandate. Okay, we want to develop AI for agriculture in particular, natural resource management, climate change, all those topics which are non-controversial. But I'm sure there are, the requirement of these multilateral organizations is to, as I think was put in fact, is to have a common basic minimum principles. The OECD AI principles and the Unesco ethics and AI recommendations are the bedrock of how the development of AI, both in terms of legislation, regulation, and governance, can take shape going further. It's a very country-specific requirement of how they want to go about it, but multilateral cooperation in emerging tech is definitely required because these technologies are fast evolving and very low regulation is currently in place to have checks and balances. Yeah. So the guardrails are required, and I think international cooperation can put in these minimum guardrails. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that the following discussion of how the international cooperation is going in this area, we're going to continue it with Yuri Tsitkov on what are the options of developing this this field. You have the floor, Yuri. Thank you so much, Anna. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's so interesting to participate in this roundtable. I would like to mention the questions that were set by the organizers of the field. They're really very relevant. If you allow me, Anna, I'm going to follow the plan. And in my presentation, I'm going to cover the main points of the agenda. The first issue, yes, of course, thank you. The first issue and the first question that we were offered to consider was the new dimension of the technological race and the unions. I just wanted to say that race maybe is not the correct word, but maybe the competition and the development of artificial intelligence. And it's ongoing, and it's been happening for the past 10 years already. We need to understand that artificial intelligence is now considered in many countries of the world by the international community as well as a new type of oil that will allow to speed up significantly the technological development of countries. Now the development of artificial intelligence is mostly connected or is in parallel as the natural resources were developed hundreds of years ago. Those who are the leader in this area is the leader in the rest. It's pretty much the same right now. Those countries which are very developed in the developing of artificial intelligence have a certain advantage over other countries. So now the competition is happening. And if we go back to the analogy with the natural resources, the unions, the existence of unions means that countries will have to share their successes and their achievements with other countries that are also in that unions. And we can see that not a lot of people want to do it when we see the work of the International Organization on Standardization. If we see the international standards that cover artificial intelligence, we can see that behind each standard there is a certain scientific organization or country or a specific organization that has already developed something before suggesting the standards. And so they create the standard, in order to provide themselves with a certain advantage. So we can see that they don't want to share their achievement with anyone else. And that's why I just want to clarify, I don't think we should be worried about the creation of some unions, because if a certain group of countries have very similar developments in the area of artificial intelligence, for example, self-driving cars, maybe they will exchange some best practices and achievements, but we cannot talk about complex, multifaceted partnership. I don't think it's quite possible now. If we talk about the second aspect of how to divide good artificial intelligence and bad artificial intelligence, according to some assessment of some specialists, we can create a definition of what is a good artificial intelligence, what is a bad artificial intelligence. Russian position is actually quite clear. Artificial intelligence cannot be neither good nor bad. This is an object, not a subject. So object is an instrument, is a tool. It can be used both for good reasons to solve some problems. For example, in medicine is to cure people. In terms of self-driving cars, it's to get a person from point A to point B. But artificial intelligence can also be used against people. The same self-driving car can be used to cause some car wreck or something like that. We can make another a simple analogy, artificial intelligence is like a tool, like a hammer. We can use it both for good reasons and for bad reasons. So this is connected with the ethics. We covered this indirectly. The consolidated position of the Russian Scientific Society is that it's quite important to cover the ethical problems when we discuss the development of artificial intelligence, both on national level and on international level. If we look at the history of our humankind, it's not a secret that national traditions, taboo practices were becoming the basis for the law, for the legislation. What is acceptable for the society becomes in these or that form a certain law with very strict regulation. So now when we adopt some principles of regulating artificial intelligence, we create the basis of how in the future the technologies of artificial intelligence will be regulated on the national legislation level or international level, with the consideration of national, ethnic, and cultural and religious tradition. So we need to remember about that. And my colleague Sergey said it quite right, that Russia is one of those countries that accepted the National Code of Ethics. This is a very good initiative. And we as a scientific society are ready to share our experience with our international colleagues. If we talk about the third aspect.
Now, as regards the third question regarding this AI race and whether we can have some compromise in the matter of AI, considering the positions of the US, China, India, Russia, the EU, all the key players. We do have some experience of working together in international organizations, for example, in the UN or in the OECD. And our past experience indicates that it is always difficult to find a consensus because all the different parties, they want to protect their know-how, their expertise, they insist on their interests. So there is always this collision of different interests. The very word compromise means that each party should be willing to give up something, to concede some of its positions. And it's always difficult. It's never easy. So we did have some very heated debates in international organizations. And we see, while it is possible to reach a consensus, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of political will to overcome existing differences. And of course, national traditions play a big role. They really affect how different countries treat AI. In some countries, they think AI should have no limits, it should develop freely. But then there are other countries that are more conservative. They say AI is only a tool, it can only be used to solve a specific problem. We should not give it free rein. We should not allow it to develop freely without limits. And they tend to over-regulate AI. So given these differences, it's really hard to find common ground between countries. I agree with what Sergey said earlier. Last year, UNESCO made this first attempt to adopt a universal document that would set some universal ethical guidelines for AI, so that we all have the same rules for AI going forward. This document produced by UNESCO is pretty complicated. They had several revisions. It's not perfect. Everybody agrees with that. It is not perfect, but at least we do have some common foundation now. So we can start building based on that. At least we have something now that we can have the same approach, more or less, when we consider regulating AI. But at this point, this is a highly politicized issue. There are a lot of differences. And it's really hard to have a pure academic discussion without any influence from political aspects. But on the other hand, the discussion we have today, this is a good example of how experts can come together because they understand that there are certain risks involved and they're willing to have a frank and open discussion. That's all I have at this point. Thank you very much, and I would be happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you. Thank you very much, Yuri. Thank you. This was very interesting. I do have a question for you. What do you think about cooperation with digital platforms? Working with international companies, how this could affect AI? Well, this is a major factor, of course. AI does not exist in a vacuum. It's part of the overall digital development. And of course, AI is often used by digital platforms. In a sense, AI is at the very heart of digital platforms. Major platforms in the US, China, India, some other countries, they can no longer operate without AI. They fully rely on AI for their operations. So I think going forward, all digital platforms will definitely use AI. And of course, digital platforms are owned by multinational corporations. So in a sense, you can say AI is now hostage to digital platforms and multinational corporations. And their goal is, on the one hand, to increase their share of the market as much as possible. And they also influence people's behavior a lot. Digital platforms are perhaps the most common technology today. It's no longer TV, let alone radio. It's digital platforms where people go today regularly for everything. So they have a lot of influence, a lot of power, and they're largely shaped by AI, because AI analyzes human behavior and tells digital platforms how they can take advantage of that, how they can promote certain goods, certain services, and sometimes some political views as well. So this technology is widely used around the world, and we did have some initiatives in Russia last year, some attempts intended to regulate the activities of digital platforms, because the state, the government still wants to control the national economy. They are afraid of losing control to these multinational corporations. That's why they try to negotiate with the digital platforms, introduce some tougher regulation, make them comply with national laws. And I think these attempts will continue going forward. I think we'll see more of that in the next few years. And it's very likely that we might see some conflicts even between multinational corporations and national governments, because they will have to negotiate and decide where the boundaries should be. They should draw the line. So there will be this clash of interests. That's why it is so important for us to find a consensus for AI, even though, like I said, this is going to be extremely difficult. But we do need some common rules. We do need some kind of level playing field. We need to take into account the interests of the state and the interest of companies of business as well. So we have our work cut out for us. And within the next 3 to 5 years, I think we'll see a lot of problems that will need to be addressed before we have proper cooperation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Yuri. Since you and I are involved in these negotiations, there is this question I see. What are the disadvantages? What are the weak points of the UNESCO document? Somebody's asking. Yes, this is a very interesting question, because you and I, we really were involved in formulating Russia's position on the UNESCO document. And I think we had, 3 or 4 different versions of this document. They rewrote the whole thing several times. They would make changes, bring some new things in, omit some things. But eventually, I think we saw this document as somewhat unbalanced in the matters of human rights. Like I said, Russian experts believe that AI is just a tool. The AI does not care about what color your skin is, whether you're male or female, etc., etc. So I don't think we should bring all these matters into regulation. I don't think this is necessary. Yet the UNESCO document talks about these matters a lot. What else? What other weak points? Experts could never give a proper definition of AI. There is no clear definition in the document. Everybody is working on AI, but we still don't have a clear, unambiguous definition of what AI is. I mean, experts come up with the definitions, but they become obsolete very quickly. So we have this paradoxical situation. We have a regulatory framework for AI, but we still cannot agree on what AI really is. So this is number 2. And number 3, well, I wouldn't describe it as a weak point of the UNESCO document, but still, we have this objection. This document, it sounds imperative, like it's an instruction, an order. But since different countries who co-signed this document, they're all at different levels, this document is somewhat unbalanced. You have countries like the United States, China, India, on the one hand. To these countries, AI is something that they use every day. But then there are other countries for whom AI is no more than an article on Wikipedia. They don't really know what AI really is. To them, it is still the future. So we are not at the same level. There is this kind of disparity between countries as far as AI. And I don't think the UNESCO document takes this into account enough. It doesn't take account of the fact that different countries are at different technological levels at this point. I wish the document would be more flexible, giving more flexibility to countries, so countries can consider their own situation and regulate AI based on that, taking into account the national specificities. But as it is, I think the document is very straightforward. It just gives instructions step by step, and I think it's just too simplistic. For Russia, it's not that bad, but for some countries, this might be a problem. So on the whole, we don't think the document is properly balanced. But in any case, this is still better than having nothing. Okay, so we can still use this document as a foundation that we can build on going forward. I think this is still an important step forward. Thank you very much, Yuri. I don't see any further questions in the chat. So next, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Benjamin Ang. And Benjamin, I would like you to take our discussion forward. Could you please talk about AI and national security issues? What should it look like? Dr. Ang, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for inviting me to speak on this topic. And I will now share my screen if I can. And I found the questions to be very helpful as well. So I will refer to them in a bit because it does talk about, there is a relationship with the questions and security. I hope you can all see my slides. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sharma.
Да, вижу.
So I look at this from the interest of a small state, and truly Singapore is a small state. Compared with everybody else who is on this call, we only have a population of less than 7 million people. So we are very concerned about what is happening in the world in the form of international politics. And when it comes to the question of technological race for AI, this has a lot of impact on small states like Singapore. The technological race between the large AI superpower countries affects us a lot. There's great power competition between the countries that are AI superpowers. We know who they are. They are competing at all levels. They are competing on trade, economics, and the military. And AI is part of all of these. And so there's also competition for standards. They influence the standards for technology and norms. So where does that leave us as small states? Small states are dependent on international cooperation and international standards. And we need AI in the small states because with small states, we have limited resources of either natural resources or human. So AI benefits us a lot in terms of things like healthcare is used to help diagnose patients better, is used to help treatment better. It helps in education. We have a program in Singapore to help the students learn better. It helps in business processes. AI is being used in many of our manufacturing outlets in Singapore to improve productivity of factories. And it is used in security. It's used for policing. And in Singapore, we have many CCTVs and surveillance cameras to help our police to enforce law enforcement. And we also have a national AI program of Singapore that aims to create the social and economic benefit through grand challenges for health and education and grants for these type of projects so that we can try and guide the AI research in Singapore towards things that will help the society and not just for commercial benefit. We also want to try to grow our local talent, but we are aware that with such a small population, if we want to build an AI ecosystem, we have to include foreign help as well, foreign companies and foreign skilled experts. And as a whole, Singapore has a smart nation plan to develop the whole country as a smart nation to make the best use of digital technology to help all the citizens. Many countries also have similar ambitions to use digital technology to help citizens, especially in the Southeast Asian region. And this is things like, if we just look at the top from the top, Codex is platforms to share data across government departments and across businesses to be able to get better use of data. National digital identity, so that we can use facial recognition to log in to government services. E-payments to make payment seamless. More and more and things. All built, if you look at the bottom, on a sensor platform. And we have a smart town called Punggol, a smart town where you actually deploy many of these sensor platforms to gather data, which then can be used to drive AI projects. And with this, we hope to create an impact through national AI projects in starting from number 1, transport and logistics, number 2, smart cities and estates, so that the urban planning can be done better. Because we are a small island, only 42 kilometers wide, AI helps us to plan the new buildings and the new neighborhoods. Healthcare, number 3, because we have an aging population, and especially AI being used to help in terms of caring for the elderly. Number 4, education is very important for us as well to help our young learn. And number 5, safety and security. So as I mentioned, the cameras that are used by law enforcement also have facial recognition and also the ability to detect clusters of people which may lead to unrest or protest. So when it comes to things of regulating AI, we do find that in the discussions that we have internationally, and I'm very happy to be able to join an international discussion like this, states have different forms of government, cultures, norms, and laws. I think it is very clear to all of us that some countries have a more liberal government, some have a more conservative. And perhaps many countries in the West will consider Singapore to be a more conservative kind of government, and our culture to be more based towards the community rather than the individual rights. So in terms of our norms and laws, they are different from state to state. There are different attitudes in different countries towards law enforcement, whether that takes a priority over individual rights and over privacy. And for Singapore, law enforcement and national security is very important to us. And we have, in the past, thanks to good law enforcement, been able to avoid a terrorist attack by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. And so we know that as things get more complex and we have lone wolf radical attacks, we need things like AI to help us to detect these threats. And then, of course, there's the role of big technology companies and platforms. Because in small states, we do not have the big companies. We have the ability to partner with them. So AI is built on public and private partnership. The photo on the left is a picture of the Esplanade, one of our largest concert halls. It's our pride and joy of Singapore. And what's in front of it is protection by Hikvision CCTVs. It's not a Singapore company, it's a company outside of Singapore. But they provide the surveillance cameras that are able to create a security around the concert hall without having to put a whole lot of police outside it. So this helps our security. And all of these private sector companies, most of whom are from outside of Singapore, are essential to our security. And AI is built on international technologies. So fast networks like 5G networks, fast hardware like the sense time facial recognition systems that in the second picture, and highly skilled experts from around the world. And we welcome all of these experts to Singapore, and we have many joint projects with many of the technology companies in the universities and also from company to company. So in my university, there are several AI centers which are developed with assistance from some of these big companies. And finally, AI is built on international cooperation. So Singapore has many cooperation deals with many countries on technology because we recognize the value of cooperation. And so you can see, for example, National University of Singapore has a Suzhou, China campus, works on things like artificial intelligence, because it is when we can share this knowledge and share the expertise from country to country that we benefit the most. But this also means that small states are vulnerable when the large powers compete on AI. Here's where international politics then becomes the difficulty for a small state. So it is very understandable when, for example, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology in China says that AI will become a new impetus for advancing supply-side structural reforms, opportunity for rejuvenating the real economy, and an engine for building China into a manufacturing and cyber superpower. That all makes a lot of sense. But then the US response also is that this is something which they are concerned about. They say that US Secretary of Defense Mark Esper has said that advances in AI have the potential to change the character of warfare, and whichever nation harnesses AI first will have a decisive advantage on the battlefield. And this is in terms of being able to make faster decisions, being able to detect adversaries faster, being able to launch drone swarm attacks, which is many drones flying together. So these are, of course, great concerns. And I think President Putin also has said that artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but for all humankind. It comes with colossal opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. Here we see that when the large superpowers are worried about AI as a potential threat, then this actually affects the ability of our small states to be able to trade freely. And it's not just the big superpowers. You notice this quote from Eric Schmidt of Google. He said, holding a global leadership position in emerging technology is both an economic and national security imperative. So he says that it is the source of the military advantage that protects the US and allies and deters aggressors. And we realize that Eric Schmidt is not a government. He is from big tech company. And yet these big tech companies have a huge impact. If they choose to pull out of any of our countries, or they choose not to supply to any of our countries, it has a huge impact on us. So they have an impact even beyond what the governments choose. This is another player which has not been always an issue in the world, and they have a great influence in international politics that we have to be very aware of. So when we see things like this, that the US has imposed restrictions on many Chinese tech companies, how does this affect small states that depend on these technologies? And if recently there's going to be a lot of restrictions placed on the Hikvision surveillance, which I showed the photo earlier, is being used to provide surveillance cameras for many of Singapore's use, how is it going to affect us in Singapore? Would it affect our ability to use them as a supplier? Would it affect trade with the US, trade with China? All of these are big issues, and this is potentially billions of dollars to a small state. And what we really need then is cooperation while the big states compete. I do give Eric Schmidt credit for having said this in that same talk, that many breakthroughs in one country will benefit researchers in the other because they are openly available or produced through cooperation. And there are many areas where cooperation has clear mutual benefits, where AI-based approaches to climate challenges, disaster relief, and healthcare. These are things which countries, regardless of the political background, can agree with, that if there is a the climate change problem is not restricted to any one country. It affects the whole world. And AI can help us to find solutions to this. Disaster relief is something which any country, regardless of the political affiliation, should want to be able to help in. And healthcare, of course, is important to all human beings. So if AI, we can cooperate on these things, even while the big powers are competing on other fields, then there is some hope for us to be able to use this technology to improve the lives for everyone. But as a small state, we can only ask and hope that the large powers are able to come to this kind of cooperation, while among ourselves, we do our best to cooperate where we can. Thank you very much. Happy to connect with anybody on this.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. From what I can see, there are no additional questions. In the chat, I have a short question. How do you see the options of short-term and long-term partnerships of small countries with large countries? What are the main issues from your point of view, and what are the issues that can be solved in a long-term perspective? Thank you.
Can I clarify, what do I see as the good and bad of partnerships between small countries and large countries? Is that the question? I'm sorry.
Нет.
No. What are the most important issues within the partnership of small and large countries, and what issues can be considered in a long-term perspective?
Thank you. I would suggest that some of the most important issues are what are the mutual areas of mutual benefit to both parties involved. And if there is a mutual benefit, then there is a better possibility for a good relationship to build up. And the second thing then is trust between the two parties. Because if we can trust one another, then we can trust one another to make the right decisions. Rather than suspect that, for example, if country A, big country A, is trading with small country B, like us, then we also need to trade with other big country C. Because we cannot just trade with one big country, we must trade with all. And so big country A must trust us that in doing this trade with country C, we are not betraying them. We are not going against big country A, but we are doing the best for our own needs, our own purposes. But they must trust. And that trust has to be built up that, we are not trying to pull either side of the great power competition, but we're trying to do the best for our population. I hope that answered the question.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sharma also has a question in the chat for you. You can see it in the chat.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma.
Благодарю.
I just want to highlight this as a unique country as Singapore, as I lived there for a year and a half in Sangkang, just to let you know. So just in a sense of being a small country, but the per capita and the technological advancement and AI, you are actually a uniquely propositioned country, which is, in spite of its size, has the infrastructure resources to implement AI-based solutions. And that is actually an advantage. That's what I'm seeing, as that you can actually implement it. You can check, you can put the checks and balances, and you can actually reverse if something is not going according to plan, in a sense. But I think the larger question is, do you think that certain use of AI, specifically I would ask the question on on facial recognition are subject to a lot of, I don't know, ethics, I would say, in a social domain, and because we're already doing it on the large scale. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma. And I think there's two parts to that. And one part is thank you for pointing out the advantages of Singapore in terms of AI. As you have lived in Singapore before, you know it is the Singapore habit to try not to say too much about how well we are doing. We tend to look at how vulnerable we are a lot of the time. But yes, that is true. We have a lot of advantages, as you stated, and we are using those advantages to drive forward as fast as possible with AI. I would say that the issue then is with the second part of your question, and you actually have identified one of the very big issues that for countries like Singapore, using surveillance is among our population considered to be something which is a good thing, that is beneficial to the population because of law and order. And in other countries, that is a different priority, that the rights of the individual to their privacy would have a priority over that. But in Singapore, it's already been used to solve a number of crimes. At least 15 wanted persons have been captured using these things. People have been on the run for many years. So for the Singapore point of view, it becomes an expectation that the police will use facial recognition and also crowd recognition in case a riot is about to start, which are very rare in Singapore. But if in case a riot is started, they'll be able to deploy people very quickly. So that becomes an interesting issue, because other countries who could supply us look at us and say, wait, Singapore, aren't you being very authoritarian? And so it's one thing if they don't supply us, but if they impose restrictions on us, then it becomes problematic. Yeah. But of course, we wouldn't use the technology to oppress the population. We just want to have law and order.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Singapore's experience led to many questions. Next question is that you said that Singapore doesn't have their own digital platforms. Won't it happen so that without their own technologies will make Singapore dependent on the country's suppliers of these decisions? And maybe Singapore has their own approach of protecting their sovereignty.
If I say we have not built anything of the size of Google or Facebook, Instagram or YouTube, platforms which are of that sort, which provide that level of services, nor do we able to build anything on the scale of Microsoft systems. So in that sense, just for the fact that if we have based on a population size of less than 7 million, it doesn't make sense to try to build something of that scale. And so we've had to then use different technologies, and also this, from my academic viewpoint, is actually better for safety, for national security, to have backup systems, that if any system were to be taken away, that we would have another system from another source to be able to switch over to that platform. And I think that is something that we have to, from my academic point of view, is actually something that would give us better security to have backup plans for different platforms.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you so much. And colleagues presentations led to additional questions, and I think that we can address them to all of the participants. Do you think that future wars will be led by the artificial intelligence of different countries? Maybe we are talking about the competition of different forms, where maybe we're not talking about the warfare. What would you say, dear colleagues? Do you think there will be a completely different approach? Anna, if you will allow me, I'll start. The question is from the dimension of whether artificial intelligence will decide themselves whether they can start a war. From my understanding, and from the understanding of the developers who work with the programming artificial intelligence, this question is not correct. The way of asking this question is not correct. As soon as artificial intelligence can decide by themselves and understand themselves as a certain cell of thinking and organ of thinking, then our humankind can just stop existing. And that's how we will end our existence. So artificial intelligence will definitely not decide by themselves. What we are discussing is that artificial intelligence will be a tool that will increase the capability of countries on the battlefield, and to some extent it will lead certain warfare autonomously, but under the control and under the guidance of humans. So this is my remark. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe someone else has something to say. Maybe you can consider this future. What do you think? I am probably in agreement with Yuri that in midterm perspective, this is going to be a tool, and later on, this is just a question of how it will be developed.
Все человечество будет жить в мире и в согласии.
Well, I just hope that there will be no wars in the future and we will all live in harmony. Maybe even AI will help us overcome all our differences, our trade conflicts, help us with cultural exchange, and all the nations will live together in peace. At least that's what I hope for. Well, I hope so too. Thank you very much, Sergey, for your comment. Okay, we have more questions coming in. Does Singapore have any special principles for regulating AI? Dr. Yang, do you have any special approaches, or are your approaches pretty much common, the same as all the other countries?
Thank you for the question. Singapore has developed AI ethics guidelines, and I'm happy to share them. They draw on ideas from around the world. Many of the top leading AI ethics guidelines have been used for the research to develop these guidelines. But of course, they are unique to Singapore because we have everybody has different priorities. Yeah, I'm happy to share the link.
Спасибо, будем очень признательны. Это весьма интересно, потому что это показывает.
Yes, please share a link. This would be actually very interesting to take a look at. We know that there are many countries, they have their national specificities, and it would be very interesting to see who does what. Eventually, we need to come up with something properly balanced that takes into account the interest of all other countries. Okay, the next question is, what do you think about China's initiative on the meta universe and the city management? Do you see any risks if you create such a platform? This is a question from our audience, and I would add to that question, are there any ways to minimize such risks? Okay, let me be first to respond and get us started. Actually, this is a very popular subject today. It's not just national states, but also multinational corporations. They all think about meta universes. You have Facebook or Meta now, but actually they're only making the first steps today. It's really difficult for us at this point to understand all the risks properly. And the risks are pretty standard, the same as our existing problems that all the developed countries face today. Basically, it's data protection, private data protection, because any meta universe will be based on data about people. And we have a lot of cybercrime today, data theft. And you can steal someone's data and act on this person's behalf, do something criminal, steal this person's money using their personal data. So these are the risks that need to be properly addressed before we move forward, before we take this technological development further. So I think we should really address this matter seriously before we dive into this meta universe. This would be somewhat similar to this film Matrix, I think. Anyway, there are some threats here. The threats related to how people interact with the government and many, many other risks. So any such initiatives should be thoroughly and carefully studied, including this recent initiative by China. Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to add something on this issue? I think Benjamin has his hand raised. Oh, Benjamin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My statement is not about China's metaverse, but more metaverses as a whole. That looking at it from a national security point of view, metaverses are really the next level of risks that come from social media platforms. That if you are concerned about, as you have mentioned just now, cybercrime, it's a fantastic place to carry out cybercrime, because a lot of people will be coming on board with no idea of how to protect themselves. If we are worried about online harms, there are already cases of people being virtually sexually harassed. If we are on the metaverse, if we are talking about hate speech and inciting violence, I think there's definitely a lot of good ways, bad ways for people to do such things, and even to do radicalization of extremists on a metaverse platform will be very, very powerful and dangerous for national security. So I think we should all be very, very careful, and I would perhaps lean towards more regulation of such platforms.
Спасибо. Я тоже думаю, что здесь вопрос...
Thank you. Actually, I agree with you. We need more regulation, both at the national level and at the international level as well. Because with Meta Universe, of course, it doesn't have national boundaries. It oversteps these boundaries. It involves regional matters, international matters, global matters. Okay, we don't have any further questions just yet. So I have a question for you to summarize our discussion, going back to the matters of global affairs, international affairs. I have a question for everybody, for all of our experts. What do you think is the most difficult point in international affairs in South-to-South relations and North-to-South relations. You know, there are some tensions here. So how can we mitigate those in the context of AI? What do you think about this? Is it okay if I start us this time? Yes, Sergey, please go ahead. Okay, I get to be first. All right, here's what I would like to say on this issue. There is this problem of disparity of technological advancement around the world. I mean, the situation between North and South, South and South, North and North, there is some disparity here. And there is this problem of gap between countries. They don't have the same access to cutting-edge technological solution. So personally, I would welcome the approach taken by Singapore. I think this is a very good example. Building partnerships with the more advanced countries, more advanced centers. I think this is the right way to go, this way of partnership. But this partnership should be equal. There should be no discrimination. Everybody should have equal access to these solutions. Because we see certain countries, they kind of restrict access to their technology for other countries. And this does increase this gap further on. This results in a situation where countries are no longer sovereign, they end up in a dependent situation. They depend, they rely on other countries' technology. And this can result in other risks. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sergey. Dr. Sharma?
Yeah, I think there's a question of AI equity. So AI is should be understood as currently it's an unequal sort of force across. It's not only the North and the South in terms of the technology and the resources. It is also about the fundamentals of understanding the emerging technology itself. So if you take the question of even simplicity on digital literacy on advanced technologies like AI, it is at very unequal levels. And I think the second fundamental is on the side of the decision makers. I would say the government, bureaucrats, and people who are at the in the chair of making decisions about these new technologies. There is a fundamental gap in terms of knowledge when it comes to the North and the South. And if you even fill that gap in terms of the knowledge, I think at least the level playing field is understanding the technology itself of what it can entail. And every one particular country, I'm talking about small or medium-sized countries, can actually resort to one particular challenge. They don't have to solve all challenges, as I think Dr. Ang was saying. If you just have a problem of disaster management or floods, and if you can utilize technology component with partnerships in solving one particular problem, I think that is good enough. You don't have to solve all problems in a country, especially in the small country. So I think there is a gap on knowledge gap, capacity gap, at decision-making level and understanding of the fundamentals and equity of AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't think we have any further comments or questions. No. Hold on. Wait, sorry. Dr. Benjamin Ang would like to say something. Okay, please go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to say that I agree with everything Dr. Sharma has said and everything that Sergey has said. And a lot of the knowledge gap is actually fueling one big problem, which is a lack of trust and too much fear between countries. And because of the lack of trust and too much fear of the AI and what AI can do, we are not able to have a good conversation. So meetings like this, I find, are very valuable, that we can talk and understand where everybody's priorities are and where people want to develop AI for the benefit of our own populations, so that we can build better trust between nations. This may be idealistic, it may be hoping for world peace, but I think we have, as an academic, I would say that this is something that we will try to strive for, with more dialogue, international dialogues like this, very beneficial to build up that ability to communicate what AI can do for us as a world, and not just the dangers of it. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, so as our moderator today, I would like to thank very much all of our experts who joined us today. Thank you for your contributions. And I would also like to thank the audience for their interesting questions. We looked at this problem from many different angles. And I'm really happy that we have a platform where we can bring experts from different countries and have a discussion like the one we had today. We can see the positions of different countries from different perspectives. I really hope that we can have more meetings like this one at the Gorchakov Foundation and at the Primakov Center, because the things we talked about today are really important. So I look forward to future discussions. We can meet online or we can meet face-to-face sometime, hopefully. And these matters are so important that we really need to come together and discuss them. This will have a great effect on our common future. So thank you very much, everybody. Look forward to meetings in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
До свидания. По-моему, было интересно.
Да, очень. Только вот мы в трансляции или нет? Я не вижу.
Думаю, что уже нет. Но даже если смотреть трансляции, всем привет.
Да. Спасибо большое, Сергей, за комментарии, за выступление.
Как всегда, высокое качество и уровень модерирования. Вижу, что вы очень круто заранее подготовились. Лучше, чем некоторые спикеры, как говорится. Вот.
Спасибо, Сергей, за доброе слово. Слушайте, хотела бы воспользоваться поводом. Мы в декабре будем делать эту нашу традиционную большую конференцию AI Global Dimension. Хотели позвать выступить. Программа пока у нас в проекте, но...
Ну, давайте, в декабре же,
это
да?
середина декабря.
Еще...
Да, середина декабря. Сейчас просто по дате определимся, потому
Даже
что
надо. Но,
трансляция идет.
Это хорошо. Вы сделали анонс в середине декабря, уважаемые коллеги. Будет важное мероприятие, куда придут важные спикеры.
Да, российские и международные. МГИМО делают и Центр искусственного интеллекта третью международную конференцию AI Global Dimension.
Супер. Вот видите, воспользуясь случаем, вы сделали прекрасный анонс.
Да.
Вот, а у меня записанный коммитмент принять участие. Хорошо, Анна, спасибо вам большое. Тогда до новых встреч.
Да, до новых встреч. Всего доброго.